Hey, y'all. Welcome to Bama Blue Dots. I'm Kat.
And I'm Michelle. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. While it can feel like the world is burning, we think it's more important than ever not to lose sight of what's happening locally, because those issues are often a precursor to bigger challenges ahead. That's why later in the show, we'll be joined by Elizabeth Williams from Reed Freely, Alabama, to discuss what's happening at the Fairhope Public Library, what it means for the First Amendment, and why it affects all of us.
But first, let's talk about some of the things going on in our nation. I'm going to have a glass of wine to get myself through this because, once again, it's not fun. At this point, we've all seen the video of someone in Minneapolis being brutally murdered by a trigger-happy ICE officer. On Saturday, Alex Preddy, a 37-year-old ICU nurse, lost his life for the crime of filming ICE. He was one of 3 legal observers who were across the street recording ICE agents trying to enter a locked donut shop in pursuit of a suspected illegal immigrant. The officers approached him and shoved 2 women to the ground. Alex tried to de-escalate and assist those who had fallen. ICE then proceeded to pepper spray him, tackle him to the ground, remove his weapon from his holster, and then they shot him 6 times, killing him. At no point was there anything in his hand aside from a cell phone. I don't think I'm alone when I say that this bullshit has gone too far. This is the second time this month I have had to watch somebody be murdered in broad daylight on camera by ICE, and the Trump administration is still trying to gaslight us into thinking that they, along with ICE officers, are somehow the victims in this. I'm sick over it. Michelle, how are you feeling?
It's devastating. It's enraging. And honestly, my initial reaction when I saw the video was shock. I was shocked that this could happen again so soon. I was shocked at how quickly official statements tried to rewrite what so many of us saw with our very own eyes. What really got me was the moment where you realize this wasn't ambiguous. This wasn't grainy footage or conflicting accounts. People watched this happen in real time from multiple angles, and yet we're immediately being told not to trust our own eyes. That's unsettling on a level that goes beyond this one incident. And that's why I think the reaction has been so strong. People are not just angry about what happened, they're angry about the lies, the gaslighting that followed. We're seeing protests and demonstrations across the country because people are demanding accountability and real consequences, not press releases designed to muddy the waters. What's even more troubling is how quickly so many officials moved to deflect the blame or frame this as justified before anyone had even done a real investigation. Instead of saying, hey, we need to understand what happened, the response was, nothing to see here, just another darn dirty Democrat trying to stop us from doing our jobs. And that tells people loud and clear that the priority isn't truth or accountability. It's about protecting power and controlling the narrative. And once that becomes the pattern, once violence is immediately excused and normalized, it stops being about one case. It becomes about what kind of country we're living in and what we're willing to accept going forward.
Honestly, there's so much to internalize and process with this. But the thing that has really just gotten to me, the hypocrisy I'm seeing from the right has me the angriest right now. I am so sick and tired of the people who bitched and moaned about mask mandates, telling everyone that victims aren't really victims because they wouldn't comply. I'm sick and tired of the same people who prioritize their Second Amendment rights over the lives of children anytime there's been a school shooting, now saying that Alex Preddy was responsible for his own death because he was legally carrying a firearm. I'm sick and tired of the people who claim Ashley Babbitt was some innocent victim, calling Freddie and Renee Good agitators who asked for it. I am sick and tired of the same people who called Kyle Rittenhouse a fucking hero, calling Alex Preddy a domestic terrorist because he had the nerve to bring a gun to a protest. I am sick of being told to not believe what I see with my own 2 freaking eyes. I am just sick and tired of all of it. And I simply cannot understand how so many people are either okay with this or just don't see it. And for Chrissy Dome to get up there with her bad Botox and her G.I. Jane cosplay outfit and say that Alex Preddy launched an unprovoked physical attack on those ICE agents when there are multiple videos showing otherwise, it's just plain insulting. Then they don't allow the state or local PD to be involved in the investigation at all. Meanwhile, they're allowing the crime scene to be contaminated. It is so obviously clear that they have zero intent of holding anybody accountable or preventing this from happening again. Still, nothing is being done about it. In fact, even days later, when she or Trump or anybody else in this shit show is being presented with the videos that we have all seen, all they say is, it's being investigated. We can't comment as it's under investigation. What? Now you can't comment because it's being investigated? That didn't stop you from coming to wild accusations immediately. I'm sorry for ranting. I'm pissed and I am so over it right now.
No, I think your reaction, and honestly, how most people reacted, is justified. And really, at this point, it's not the violence itself that fuels everyone's continued anger. It's about what happens every single time immediately afterwards. It's the rewriting of reality. At this point, the problem is not the lack of evidence. We have multiple videos
Yeah.
from multiple different angles taken by different people, and the facts are not unclear. What is actually being contested is whether people are willing to accept what they are seeing when it doesn't align with the narrative they want to believe. That is that hypocrisy that you're talking about. It really becomes impossible to ignore. The same people who constantly talk about personal freedoms and constitutional rights suddenly decide those rights are conditional.
I'm pissed because they've made me agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene, and now they're making me agree with the NRA.
An illegally carried firearm becomes proof of guilt. Filming law enforcement becomes provocation. De escalation becomes instigation. And somehow, over and over again, the responsibility gets shifted onto the person who ends up losing their life. There is also a critical structure that keeps getting buried beneath all of this, that ICE does not have special or expanded authority to police U.S. citizens. Their statutory authority is tied specifically to immigration enforcement. When any federal agent uses force, especially deadly force, it has to meet the same constitutional standards that apply to every other law enforcement agency. And it must happen within the context of a lawful enforcement action. That is not a political opinion. That is straight out of DHS policy. So when officials rush to justify what happened instead of slowing down and preserving evidence and allowing for independent investigations, people notice. When the response prioritizes controlling the narrative over establishing the truth, people fucking notice. And when accountability is treated as optional rather than essential, trust completely collapses. And that is why this feels like a breaking point for so many people, for you, for me, for everyone. It is no longer about one man or one incident, one woman. It's about whether the rule of law actually applies evenly or whether it only applies when it's convenient for those in power.
And for years now, I feel like those of us on the left, we have been pleading with conservatives, begging them to stop supporting immigration policies that ultimately harm them, mostly economically, but it's still harmful to them. The left has been explaining over and over and over the potential economic impacts. We've shown them the cost that this will add to the deficit. We have shown them the cost of everything, and they just don't care. At the end of the day, I think it's now clearer than ever. The truth is, we have all known they don't see immigrants as people, but not just immigrants, they don't see anyone left of MAGA as people either. If you don't personally believe what they believe and fit their agenda, they don't give a shit about you.
Absolutely. And this is where it really becomes clear the impact of those policies is no longer theoretical or purely economic. It's personal. It feels personal. And it's already affecting people who are citizens, who are voters, who were told this would never touch them, right? It was always just the bad guys, just the bad ones. So, across the country, there are growing reports of U.S. citizens being detained or questioned during immigration enforcement actions. Here in Alabama, we have seen a man in Foley detained twice despite being a U.S. citizen. Just recently, in Leeds, a woman was arrested simply for trying to enter her own home. Now, it matters that the Leeds case involved local police rather than ICE, but that distinction does not make this situation any better.
Mhm.
In many ways, it makes it worse. What we're seeing is a broader cultural shift in law enforcement where arrest first and sorted out later is becoming normalized whenever immigration is even vaguely involved. And that is the through line that people need to understand. This is no longer confined to one agency or one jurisdiction. The tone is being set at a federal level and it's filtering down. It shapes behavior, it lowers the threshold for suspicion, and it emboldens officers to act first and justify later. And what makes the lead case especially revealing is that the people close to it have said that this woman involved was a Trump supporter,
Mhm.
MAGA hat, you know?
Yep.
And that really cuts through the illusion that loyalty, politics, and identity will somehow insulate people from harm. Your skin color, your religion, your party affiliation, your MAGA hat, none of that guarantees you safety. In this framework, you are either compliant or you are perceived as a threat. And all of this is happening alongside the rhetoric from people like JD Vance, who have publicly suggested that federal law enforcement should have immunity when it comes to immigration enforcement. Most people know there are good cops out there, but we
Yeah.
also live in a reality where the systems are designed to protect bad behavior once it occurs.
Mhm.
When you combine that with the messaging that signals a lack of consequences, it is naive to believe that bad actors at the state and local levels do not hear that message and internalize it as permission. This is what people warned about, not as hypothetical, not as fear mongering, but as a predictable outcome. It is a stair step to their front door.
All of this just pisses me off so much. If you look at all of this and all you can think is, well, this is what it takes to get the violent criminals off the streets, then I have a big newsflash for you. First of all, Biden actually deported more people in 2024 than Trump did in 2025 without releasing an unvetted and untrained Gestapo to terrorize American cities. Second, immigrants are significantly less likely to commit violent crimes than citizens are. And if you want to bring up Laken Riley and ask why nobody protested her death, my response would be to ask you why you don't seem to give a damn about the thousands of women who are killed by white men every single year. Why is she the only one that seems to matter to you? Never mind the fact that the guy who killed her was caught and her family got justice through the traditional channels of the justice system. Another question is you have significantly more immigrants in Florida and Texas. Why the hell isn't ICE there? Why are they in Minneapolis where there's about 100,000 immigrants in that state? This is all political. That's all this is. And lastly, I would suggest that you read a damn history book because this is exactly how authoritarian regimes begin. They create a scapegoat that allows them to increase their military power. Then they use that military power to control everybody. So if you think that your whiteness is going to keep you safe, sorry, but you're wrong. At this point, I just pray that people start to see this before it's too late.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It's really impossible to look at what's happening right now through a historical lens and not feel horrified. What we're watching follows patterns that have repeated themselves over and over again throughout history. Fear gets amplified, a scapegoat is chosen, people are told that extraordinary force is necessary to keep them safe. And once that power exists, it never stays neatly confined to the group it was supposedly meant for. History shows us that authoritarianism rarely arrives all at once. It just doesn't show up with flashing lights and a formal announcement. It creeps in slowly under the banners of safety, law and order, and emergency powers. By the time people realize those tools are being used against everyone, not just the so called other, it's often much harder to stop. And what makes this moment especially chilling is how familiar the language feels. Your dehumanizing rhetoric, calls for immunity, arrest first, explain later, demands for unquestioning obedience paired with the removal of accountability. None of this is new. These ideas are recycled and they always lead to the same outcomes. So the real question really becomes what do we do now? What do we do about it? First, we need to stop normalizing it. We refuse to treat these events as isolated incidents or unfortunate necessities. We talk about them openly, we document what's happening, and we push back on false narratives, even when doing so is uncomfortable, exhausting, or unpopular. Second, we demand accountability at every level, local, state, federal. That means showing up to your city council meetings. It means supporting watchdog journalism, and it means backing civil rights organizations. And it absolutely means paying close attention to who we are electing and what they are willing to excuse. No more vote blue no matter who. A blue fox in a henhouse is still a fucking fox. And finally, we protect each other. Real change does not start with blind faith in institutions. It starts with communities that refuse to be divided, that understand how quickly it won't happen to me turns into it already did. History does not repeat itself exactly, but it sure damn does rhyme. And what we're hearing and seeing right now should be setting off alarm bells for everybody.
Yeah, I will say this. It is a really shitty time to be a World War II history nerd. Just saying.
Absolutely.
But I feel like we've reached a tipping point where we all need to decide what side of history that we're going to be on. Whether it's volunteering to help candidates who oppose this administration, speaking truth against lies you see on social media with your peers, working with mutual aid organizations, like you said, supporting groups and organizations that support and protect the most vulnerable, call and email your representatives. Put pressure on them. And most of all, call out the bigotry and hatred when you see it. Being a blue dot in a red state, I'm sure that you've seen anytime there's a protest, half the comments about the news stories are they're paid protesters. I didn't recognize any of those people. You know why they think that we're all paid protesters? Because we don't speak up when we see it. When you see hatred and bigotry in action, say something. When you see people spreading falsehoods, call it out. That costs no money. That is something you can do as you see it. But we need to start holding people accountable to their behavior. And at the very least in November, show up and vote, please, because we are never going to make a change if we don't start actually doing something. We have got to fight back in any way that we possibly can. It's really easy to look at everything happening on a national level right now and feel completely helpless. I know I do, a lot of times. It has been very hard emotionally to get through every single day when the news cycle is what it is right now. But the fight is also at a local level. And at a local level, it's actually significantly easier to make a real and direct impact. So after the break, we are going to hear from someone fighting a pretty huge fight in a small town. And it's a fight that could set the precedent for the future of local libraries around the country.
Welcome back, y'all. Here at Bama Blue Dots, our mission is to connect people across the state and talk about issues that affect our communities. While many of our conversations do include progressive opinions and voices, that does not mean every guest we bring on shares our political affiliation or any affiliation at all. Some of the topics we cover are fundamentally nonpartisan, and today's conversation is one of those. This discussion is not about party politics or ideology. It is about constitutional rights, public institutions, and issues that impact everyone, regardless of how you vote. Kat and I are very open about our views, but those opinions are ours alone and should not be attributed to our guest in any way. Our focus today is about facts, real-world impact, and ensuring you, our listeners, are educated about this very serious threat to our constitutional rights. With that said, we're really glad to welcome Elizabeth Williams from Read Freely, Alabama, who is joining us to talk about what has been happening with the Fairhope Public Library, what it means for intellectual freedom, and why it matters to our community. Elizabeth, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Elizabeth, thanks again for being with us. For listeners who may not be familiar with you or Read Freely, Alabama, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work your organization does?
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. Read Freely Alabama is a genuine grassroots, non-astroturf grassroots community of concerned citizens pushing back on censorship in Alabama libraries. We are nonpartisan, fiercely so, because this is a nonpartisan issue, as you mentioned earlier. And we've only been around about 2.5 years because we were founded in Prattville as a response to some of the activities that were going on in that town during 2023, when a group calling themselves Clean Up Prattville started challenging books in the library and actually ended up taking over the library board, which was devastating. I've been in this role for 2 years, seen a lot of things happening down here in Baldwin County during that time. And Prattville was the original epicenter, but I think Fairhope certainly is now. Like I said, we're nonpartisan. And so some of the stuff that we do is legislative advocacy, voter education, meeting with people in our community, and organizing people in our community to push back on these censorship efforts.
Elizabeth, given your work with Read Freely Alabama, can you help our listeners understand what has been happening at the Fairhope Public Library over this past week?
Oh, I'm glad you said over this past week, because I was about to take a deep breath and say, how much time do you have?
Oh, that's the next question.
Yeah, it's all I can do to keep up. We've had a lot of developments. We had our local state senator, Chris Elliott, was able to pass an anti-library bill that he has sponsored for the third year running, which weakens the independence of local library boards. And even though his reasoning publicly has been very dry and administrative about filling policy gaps and getting Montgomery out of the business of running local libraries, he actually gave an interview to Gulf Coast Media that was published earlier today. He really showed his hand. I don't have exact quotes in front of me, but he went on to talk about how this bill was really about giving concerned parents who were worried about inappropriate material in front of their children, giving them a bigger voice. So we have a feeling that some of these forces of censorship have gotten to him, which is unfortunate because he is our representative down here. And we do need to, as constituents, let him know that not all Baldwin parents feel the same way that these Moms for Liberty do. So that's one thing that happened earlier today. Last week, we had a situation where a representative of one of these local censorship groups, I'll call her the founder of the Moms for Liberty chapter here in Baldwin County, who's since gone on to leave that organization and found her own. She is the same person that went to Montgomery last year and called on the state library board to revoke Fairhope's funding because she didn't like the outcome of a couple of her book challenges. And that was successful. On Monday, she went to the county commission to call on them to pull Fairhope out of the courier service, which is a shared service between all Baldwin County libraries, of which there are many, that allow them to share books from their collections quite efficiently. So if I'm in Spanish Fort, I can request a book from the Foley Library and have it in my hands usually within 24 to 48 hours because of this wonderful courier service that all of our Baldwin libraries pay into and support. And it's made possible through something called the Baldwin County Public Library Service, which is now in the hands of the county commission. And local activists went to the county commission, demanded they pull Fairhope out because there is a stipulation in the contract that says that in order to be eligible to participate in this courier service, the library has to be eligible for state aid. The same day that this was all going down, the library board did receive a formal letter from John Wall, who is chair of the Alabama Public Library Service, was chair of the Alabama Republican Party until he stepped down on Friday to announce his bid for lieutenant governor. Yeah, so there's been a lot happening. So Tuesday, there was the county commission. There was the anti-library activists who spoke. There were a lot of people who showed up for the library. The county commission allowed 2 people to speak. And then they announced that the Fairhope contract with the courier service would be terminated as of that Friday until they move all sexually explicit content. So whatever the APLS board feels is sexually explicit, and we can talk about that definition a little bit later and how problematic it is. But whatever the APLS board feels is sexually explicit, Fairhope needs to remove that, and then their state aid will be reinstated.
You mentioned the courier service. Can you expand on that a little more and why losing that has such a huge impact?
Yeah, the courier service, it's like an interlibrary loan program on steroids. I think a lot of people are familiar with the concept of an interlibrary loan, that if you want a book and maybe it's in a library in Montgomery, you can request it. Usually that goes through the mail. There might be a fee. The courier service, because of this agreement that's countywide between all the county libraries, and so rather than sending them via mail with fees, they have literal couriers who run a circuit and pick these books up and drop them off, and it's really seamless. I use it all the time. And the thing is, when Fairhope gets kicked out of the courier service, which it is, the people who are suffering most are not the people in Fairhope who ostensibly are being punished. It's the people out in the unincorporated areas who come into Fairhope and use their library card here. It's the people out in Alberta and Silver Hill and Summerdale in these smaller communities who are used to having access to Fairhope's very extensive collection. So now those people are being punished as well.
Now, this isn't the first time y'all have made headlines in the last year, correct? How did this all start?
Oh, Lord have mercy. How much time do you have? I first became aware of this issue locally here in Fairhope in the fall of 2023. I think a group of people went to a library board meeting and started talking about obscenity law and the Miller test and saying that books in the library were pornographic. I was at one of those early meetings. I did not speak. I listened because I admitted to myself that I don't know. Maybe there is something to what these folks are saying, and I should not just dismiss them out of hand. So I stayed after and talked to some of the people who had spoken about their concerns, tried to get titles or where they were quoting from when they were saying that books were encouraging this and that. Wasn't able to get any of that information out of them. And I did talk to those folks about collection development. I'm actually a trained librarian, so I have a master's in library and information science, which is the minimum requirement for all librarians. And in that, we spend a great deal of time in that program studying collection development. I myself studied cataloging too, which is about classification and placement of books and making sure that the library subject headings are appropriate and things like that, and that the books are going in the right section for their intended audience. After that meeting, I took it upon myself to get a list of the books these folks were concerned about and to read as many as possible. Now, the original list that was handed to the library with demands to have all these books removed is interesting. It was a long list. I would say there was about 100 books that these people wanted removed from the sections for minors, which would mean the children's section downstairs and the teen section upstairs. So when you looked at that list, turns out a third of those titles they wanted removed weren't even in the Fairhope collection. So somebody didn't do their homework at all. Another third were already in the adult section, so not sure where they wanted them moved to. They were asking for them to be moved to adult. They were already there. And then the final third were books for younger audiences, mostly teens. I took it upon myself to read and collect as many of those as possible to see, okay, is this true? Is there really explicit or pornographic material in our library? I'm not just going to dismiss it out of hand and say these people are making things up. They seem concerned. So let's find out. I'm a mother. At the time, I had a 5-year-old who's now an 8-year-old, is an early reader, voracious reader. He's been reading since he was essentially a toddler. So I wanted to know if there's something inappropriate in our library. Not only did I not find anything that would be even remotely considered pornographic, I encountered a lot of really wonderful books that I would not have read if these folks hadn't challenged them. I do thank them for that, for introducing me to the work of Patricia Moore Cormack and Ellen Hopkins and several other of the writers. John Green, I got to read John Green. A lot of great writers on their list. So they did do well when they selected those, but nothing that was, I would say, was inappropriate for the age for which it was shelved and cataloged. And like I said, most of those were for teens. We're talking about award-winning young adult fiction. We're talking about memoirs, coming-of-age stories, and sex education content too that is age appropriate for younger people.
What were some of the books that they were taking issue with? What were they? I know you said it was pornographic, but I can't see y'all stocking the shelves with porn.
There isn't any. And just so everybody knows, there is a legal definition of obscenity in Alabama law and federal law. Nothing in the library should meet that definition. In order to be considered obscene, you have to meet 3 prongs of what we call the Miller test. We call it the Miller test because it came out of a court case in the 70s. It was Miller versus California. So there are 3 prongs. The first one is that the work as a whole, which is very important, has to appeal to the prurient interest. And prurient is not a word that we use a lot, But basically, when you look it up, the prurient interest might mean that it's designed to titillate or arouse or bring some sexual feelings to the forefront. It's got to be designed to do that. We're not talking about an anatomy textbook. We're not talking about sex ed. We're not talking about a paragraph in an award-winning novel. So it's got to appeal to the prurient interest. It's got to be patently offensive with regard to what the community finds appropriate for minors. That's prong 2. These folks love prong 2. They're fine with that one. But the third prong they also want to throw out is that the work has to be devoid of any artistic, literary, political, scientific value. So it's smut, it's garbage. It's a really great test. It's pretty solid for making sure that you can separate actual pornography from work that may reference human sexuality, but is there for a reason to edify and educate rather than to arouse or titillate. I did not find anything that would be legally obscene or harmful to minors, which is, it's a version of the Miller test that is just for young people, where maybe an adult could say they read Playboy for the articles, right? And they find literary value in that. Most of us will agree that doesn't have literary value for minors. So that is just the harmful to minors test adds for minors onto those prongs. Nothing in the library meets the definition of obscenity, and nothing in the sections for minors should be considered harmful to minors. So that standard is already being followed. And what the State Library Board has done is tried to skirt the law and say that the first prong about appealing to the prurient interest and the third prong about having value don't matter. It's basically, is it offensive to adults? And I guess they're claiming to speak for the community because community standards is part of that second prong. I just like to make this clear that they have not passed any law with this definition in, but they put out a memo saying that libraries have to move any materials that reference a laundry list of different topics that they think are obscene. Many of them are things that we would not ever want to put in front of children. They are sound. But then there's also a bullet point that says nudity. Now, it doesn't say sexual nudity or nudity, lascivious nudity or anything like that. I think we can all see, and most folks, no matter what team they're on, can see the problem with that, with nudity being a single criterion for making a whole book sexually explicit. So we're talking about art history, we're talking about mythology. The textbooks I taught out of when I taught middle school Latin would not pass muster if anybody were to take this definition of sexually explicit seriously. But yet the APLS board is saying that anything that references or alludes to human sexuality is automatically sexually explicit and therefore inappropriate for minors and must be moved. But one of the problems is moving sex education, because anything that references sexuality or has nudity in it now must be moved to the adult section under the APLS memo, which is non-binding and has no legal merit or weight. But any sex ed book must be moved. And so what we're talking about now is books on puberty, like the What's Happening with My Body books or Where Babies Come From books, are being moved by libraries who are complying, and there are many libraries in Baldwin County who have done this, and they're being moved to the adult section right next to books on adult human sexuality. They're shuffled right in there. So if you've got a curious 11-year-old who wants to know what's going on with their body, that's where they're going now. They're going and they're browsing past the joy of sex and the Kama Sutra and whatever else is down there. So I see that as a problem. And for some reason, these people who go on and on about protecting children don't see it as a problem, that they're forcing children into the adult section to find books written at their age level for them that are developmentally appropriate for younger folks.
What are some of the titles they've tried to move or ban?
I can speak to Fair Hope. So The Handmaid's Tale is one that's been in the news a lot lately. Some people would say, oh, that's a book for adults anyway, and maybe, but the reason it's there in the teen section of the Fairhope Library is because it is on the recommended reading list for Baldwin County schools.
I read it in 12th grade, but
yeah, it's an important book. There are a couple books by Ellen Hopkins, Crank and Identical. Crank is a book that she wrote after her daughter was struggling with addiction to methamphetamine. She wrote this, and in the introduction, it says that just one or two young people are spared what my daughter went through from reading this book, then it will have been worth it. This is an anti-drug book that talks about the horrors of addiction and some of the things that people who are addicted to drugs will do for money. So you can see there might be some sexuality in there, but it's in service to a greater purpose, which is an anti-drug message. There is Sold by Patricia McCormick, who was wonderful enough to come and visit the Fairhope Library last fall. Sold is a beautiful book. It's very short. I read it in one sitting because I could not take my eyes off of it. It's breathtaking and it's devastating. It is about a young girl who is sold into slavery to feed her family as she's tricked and trafficked. And it's a story of resilience, how she survives, and how, I guess I'm going to spoil it, but she escapes in the end. And so it's a beautiful story. And the author, Patricia McCormick, she spent years interviewing real survivors of sex trafficking in Nepal and India to compile their stories into the story that she tells. And I just think it's so sad that these people, again, who say they're protecting children, are trying to shove these stories back into the darkness. These girls who survived and spoke out, they are trying to silence their voices. I think it's unconscionable.
I know you touched on this a little bit ago. I've seen the comment sections under AL.com articles about it, and so many of the comments say they're not trying to ban any books. No one's trying to ban anything. They just want to move to the adult section. How do you respond to that?
So, as a librarian, we spend a lot of time talking about the First Amendment and talking about censorship. And the definition of censorship that the American Library Association subscribes to might be a little broader than some of those people in the comment section. Dr. Emily Knox talks about the 4 R's of censorship, which are redaction, removal, which is what we would call a book ban, restriction, which is hiding a book, making somebody ask for it behind the counter, and relocation, which is taking a book that was intended for a particular audience or belongs in a particular section and moving it to a section where it doesn't belong. I would say, yes, moving books in the library is not book banning, and we don't use that term. It is censorship, though. And when it comes at the behest of a state agency, it is government censorship, which is unconstitutional. It's been found over and over again to be unconstitutional. The government cannot tell a local library to censor constitutionally protected speech, and by which I mean speech that is not obscene or harmful. The library should be allowed to function as libraries have always functioned, putting the books where they will best reach their intended audience. And when the government comes in and says, no, you have to shelve this over here, it's not only government overreach, it is unconstitutional.
So, Elizabeth, some people might look at this and wonder why what's happening at a single public library in a small city matters. Can you help explain why the situation is bigger than just one library or a handful of books?
Yeah, Fairhope has been a test case. John Wall, the APLS board chair, did say back last winter that he planned to make an example of Fairhope. We did have a very active Moms for Liberty chapter, which is one thing that makes Fairhope a little unique. So we did have a local activist who was really staying on the board, and that's what makes this a little bit different. But if these people succeed in getting what they want here, which is getting the books moved, getting control of where libraries shelf books, they are most certainly going to take that and start doing it all around the state. When we give the government the power to decide what ideas and what identities are appropriate and inappropriate, we are really opening up a Pandora's box. So Fairhope is the first to lose its state funding. I don't think it'll be the last. And I hope it's not the last, because that will mean that other libraries in Alabama are actually standing up against this unconstitutional condition that the APLS board is putting on state aid, which is coming down the pike. And we haven't talked about that yet. They passed an amendment to update the rules for state aid, meaning the rules that libraries have to follow to get that funding from the state. They updated those to say that positive depictions of trans people are inappropriate for children. So if a book has a trans character, however minor, that would mean that book now has to be censored. And so libraries who follow those new APLS guidelines, they're really in a bind because what they are doing is violating their patrons' First Amendment rights, which opens them up to litigation. So it's a really tough place for them to be, stuck between, do I get my state aid or do I just throw away the Constitution and open myself up to lawsuits? And I wouldn't want to be a library director right now. It's a bigger issue than Fairhope. It is a clear proxy war about who gets to control information. Is it trained professionals? Is it parents? Or is it the government?
Obviously, this isn't something that started or is ending in a single week. What does this fight look like now? What are the next steps? And what should people understand? And what's realistically at stake going forward?
So right now, because I am so focused on Baldwin County and our local issues, I am really focused on getting the courier service restored. This is an obvious pressure tactic by these pro-censorship activists. They failed superbly when they tried to get Fairhope's funding revoked because we raised way more money than the library was going to get from the state in 2 years. So they weren't able to succeed with that. And so now they are using this courier service as another lever that they can push to put pressure on the Fairhope Library to just move the books and fold, which again, it will not just be those 10 books. I am encouraging local Baldwin County people to contact the county commission, let them know that you want Fairhope back in the courier service and that they need to rewrite the contract, which they are fully capable of doing. In the county commission meeting last week, one of the commissioners seemed to be confused on this point. They can rewrite the contract. They have the authority here in the county. There is no state rule preventing them from rewriting the contract to remove that requirement that a library has to be eligible for state aid in order to participate. So that is one step that you can take to get the courier service reinstated for Fairhope. Another thing you can do is contact Senator Elliott, let him know that you're his constituent and you do not support his anti-library bill, which is Senate Bill 26, which again just passed out of Senate committee and is headed to the floor. It would weaken local governance of libraries. We don't want that to become law. That would weaken the independence of local library boards, and it would take the power and the authority out of the hands of the board and put it in the hands of local politicians who might be more susceptible to political pressure to remove books that some might find controversial. So we need to stop that bill. We're anticipating that there might be other bad bills coming down the pike. Just stay aware of what's going on in the legislature right now during this legislative session, and there may be more things that we need to fight. If you're in Fairhope, please let your library board members and your city council and the mayor know that you are supportive of them continuing to hold the line against censorship. I know that they're under much more pressure this week than they were last week when they were rolling in donations and able to tell the state to take their censorship money and stick it where the sun don't shine. Now they've got their patrons being upset about the loss of the courier service. That should go to the county commission, not to the library board. They are following the law. Their library policies are APLS approved, and they are following the APLS approved policies. Fairhope is fully compliant with APLS rules as written. The APLS board, though, is not satisfied with that, and they want to dictate where individual books are shelved. So we find that inappropriate. And if you find that inappropriate, let your board and local representatives know that you support the library because they need our support.
Where can listeners go to find out more about what's happening or to support Read Freely Alabama?
We have a website. We are pretty active on Facebook, which I know might be a little cringe for some of your younger listeners. We are mostly ladies of a certain age, and Facebook is still the most effective way we found to organize because we can do all the things as far as getting information out there with links and action items. So you can join Read Freely Alabama on Facebook. That's a statewide group. And you can also join Read Freely Baldwin County, which is the one that I am running. And I do my best to keep our members updated whenever there's a new development. I don't always fully succeed, but if you want to keep up with it, that's the best place. And then on our website, you can join as a member and you will be added to our email list. We send out email blasts when there is something really urgent that we need people's attention on. We will not spam you.
And what can listeners do in their own communities to protect and support their local libraries?
Number one, get a library card if you don't have one. Those numbers matter. Number two, use your library. Number three, get to know your librarians. That is one of the things that our local anti-library activists never bothered to do. They went straight to the city council. They went straight with the torches and pitchforks. And if they just talked to our librarians, they would have found out that these people are not in some nefarious plot to turn your kids trans or whatever. They are good people. They listen to their patrons, and they are doing the very best they can in a really difficult situation. And that is nationwide right now. Librarians are under a lot of pressure. So I'll say, yeah, number three, be nice to your librarians. Do something sweet for them. And then as far as the activism, yeah, just get involved in whatever groups you have going on locally. They're pushing back. Read Freely isn't the only one. We try to be a resource hub for all these anti-censorship groups here in Alabama. But there are others. If you're in Huntsville, there is the Root Collective, which are also pushing back on censorship and other issues. We have chapters in Auburn, in Jefferson County, in the Prattville area, and several other places throughout the state. Please do join our member list to stay updated and let us know if there's not a chapter in your community and you want to start one, because that's the thing. Even if these people have not come to your library yet, it is only a matter of time. They are getting more and more emboldened. And when they're not finding success in Fairhope, they're probably going to find another library to pick on. So be ready for them, be prepared, and write your legislators. Let them know how you feel.
Well, Elizabeth, thank you for sharing all of that with us. I think conversations like this are such an important reminder that what's happening locally really does matter and that these issues don't exist in a vacuum. With so much chaos happening in the world right now, it can be easy to lose sight of what's happening in our own communities. But as we've talked about today, local decisions have real consequences, and they're often where much bigger fights begin. Elizabeth, thank you again for taking the time to join us and help our listeners better understand what's happening at the Fairhope Public Library and why it matters. And to everyone listening, thank you for spending part of your day with us. Your support is what helps us continue building this platform and having these conversations.
We hope y'all will definitely join us again next week. If y'all have a topic you would like to hear us discuss or need help finding progressive groups or resources near you, please contact us via our website at bamabluedots.com. And for more of our antics or to connect with us directly, make sure to follow us on TikTok and Blue Sky. We hope y'all have a great week. Bye, y'all.
Bye.